Hello and welcome to all my social studies buddies out there. We continue with Unit 2B today, and today we move into fascism in Nazi Germany. So, as we're going through today's lesson, if you get the chance, you can go into D2L and you click on resources, click on content, click on Unit 2B, and you'll see the Unit 2B notes are there in D2L. So you can scroll through and you can find today's lesson, which is lesson 2. If you happen to have a printer at home, you can print it out. If not, you can just copy down like sort of the extra stuff. You can write down the extra stuff on a separate piece of paper. And then when you're back in school, I can give you a copy of these partial notes so that you can make them complete. You can do it however it works for you. All right, so fascism in Nazi Germany. Here we go. So what is fascism? Well, fascism is this authoritarian, ultranationalist system of government, right? You learned about ultranationalism in Social 20, and you learned that Nazi Germany was an example of ultranationalism, and it's true. They believe in the rule of the elite, okay? So they believe that there are some people that are just better than others, and we should not discourage that. In fact, we should encourage it. That's just a natural part of the world, according to fascists. And so the more intelligent people, they should be the ones who are running the country, whereas the rest, well, depending on which form of fascism you believe in some cases that means taking away their rights. In other cases, that means taking away their ability to reproduce. But we will talk about that some more. In a fascist ideology, individuals must be subordinate to the good of the nation. Okay, so individuals do not matter in a fascist society. What matters is what's good for the nation as a whole, even if small minorities of people are severely persecuted. And so fascism is a rejection of liberalism in the same way that communism is a rejection of liberalism, because fascists rejected democracy. They said that democratic governments were weak and indecisive, and a fascist government is capable of making big changes, right? It is capable of taking hold of the country and doing what it needs to do in difficult times. Fascists rejected many individual rights and freedoms that were given to people in liberal democracies, and you're going to see which rights and freedoms were denied a lot of people in fascist societies. Fascists also rejected communist ideas such as equality and the empowerment of the working class. So it's important to know that fascism is not the same as communism. Both of these ideologies rejected liberalism, but fascists detest communists, okay? They are different in the sense that fascists do not believe in equality whatsoever, and they also believe in some forms of economic freedom, and we'll talk about that. So the word fascism comes from this Italian word right here, which means strength through unity. So in your partial notes, you're going to see that there's a square, or I guess it's a rectangle over here. What I'm asking you to do there is just kind of draw some horizontal lines, all right? And then draw as if you were tying those lines together, all right? And that's the idea behind fascism, is that each of these individual little branches here is one person in society, and each individual person can easily be broken. However, if you put us together, right? If you combine the strength of all members of society and you tie us together so that we act as one, well, then we cannot be broken, right? Just like what you see in this image here. So you can kind of recreate your own version of that image in this rectangle here. And I think that's going to help you remember fascism. Strength through unity. So fascists believe that their nation state has a shared purpose, right? That individualism is not the important thing. You don't try to make your own life good. Instead, you try to make the life of the nation good. Oops. And fascists want their nations to dominate other nations. That's an important part, because fascists tend to believe in the importance of their own nation, right? That their nation is above all others. And so their nation has the right to expand and dominate other nations. So fascism versus communism. Let's look at some differences here. But first, let's look at some similarities. In both cases, in both ideologies, the economic power is subservient to political power. So political power is always the most important thing in both fascism and communism. And government has almost complete control over the economy. That's true all over, although government has more control over the economy in a communist country as opposed to a fascist country. So here are some differences. Government ownership and control is focused on military purpose in fascism. Okay, so in fascism, there is not complete public property, right? So there is private property in a fascist economy. However, the government does have ownership and control over certain elements of the economy, which is mainly for military purposes. Okay? And economic decisions are made to benefit members of the ruling party and industrial elite rather than the workers. Okay, so fascists are all about the elite. Fascists will give special privileges to people who will become party members, people who will join the fascist ruling party. They will get all the special privileges in the economy. Okay, so you guys probably recall your spectrum that you learned in lesson 1. Okay, and so this is the double spectrum. You have the economic spectrum is horizontal, the political spectrum is vertical, right? We placed Canada and the United States over here, more on the freedom side of the spectrum, right? And if you go all the way to the extreme end of the freedom side of the spectrum, you end up with anarchy. Well, as you learned in the last lesson, Soviet communism is over here on the left side of the economic spectrum because the government had full control over the economy. And Soviet communism is also on the government control part of the political spectrum, but not as far into government control as with fascism. As you're going to see, in a fascist society, the government has absolute full control over people's political lives, but not 100% total control over people's economic lives, although they have more control than a country like Canada. So elements of a fascist regime. These are all written in your partial notes. You can just follow along. It's a corporative economy. Capitalism under government control, right? So the government allows people to have economic freedom to a certain degree, but the government can step in at any moment and take control. They use a totalitarian government, right? Totalitarian government which controls all phases of life. It's fanatical, it's irrational, sentimental, faith versus reason, right? So it promotes nationalism through emotion. A lot of things are done to promote fanatical nationalism. A lot of rallies, right? A lot of big rallies to get the nation together to promote a strong national identity. Elitism. Only a small minority of people are believed to be capable of learning, and the leader of the country is infallible. You must listen to absolutely everything the leader says, or you will suffer the consequences. Racism is an important part, right? Fascists believe that their nation is superior to others. They're anti-union, so they do not support labor unions, right? Because the workers, they are at the bottom of the pyramid, and they are against workers' rights as well. They also believe in racial purity. They do not want their race to mix with others. And they're willing to deny human rights of individual people if that means it's going to help, if it's going to be good for the nation as a whole. Okay, strength is greater than intellect. Right? Men are also considered superior to women. Soldiers are considered superior to civilians and take priority over them. And the nation's strength is more important than the individual rights of individual people. Okay, so we are learning about fascism. All right, and an important part of fascism is social Darwinism. All right, so social Darwinism is a non-scientific interpretation of something that actually is scientific. So I'm sure you've heard of Charles Darwin. He wrote a book in 1859 called The Origin of Species, which completely rocked the world of modern science. And this book is based in real science. Okay, and so it teaches us about natural selection and evolution of different species. And social Darwinists took this actually scientific idea and distorted it and applied it to a context in which it was not meant to be applied. So social Darwinists, well, let's start with Darwin. So Darwin proposed the theory that animals evolve through competition and natural selection. All right, and the strongest and the fittest animals survive and the weak do not. Okay. Well, social Darwinists take that idea and they say that some people achieve power over others because they are stronger and they are fitter, okay, which is something that Charles Darwin himself did not say. Okay, but social Darwinists took it and applied it to human societies. Okay, and social Darwinists believe that there are natural inequalities between people. And this is not only popular with fascists, it's also popular with laissez-faire capitalists. And fascists have taken it to the next extreme, which is they came up with this idea called eugenics. And so with eugenics, it's this idea that only healthy seed must be sown, right? And so it's an ideology based on the improvement, in quotation marks, of the human species through selective breeding or genocide. And so the idea is that only the strongest and the fittest and the most intelligent people will be allowed to reproduce and pass on their genetics to the next generation. And so with many fascists, the idea behind that is to create a superior nation of people and to not allow people who they consider to be less strong and less fit to be allowed to reproduce. Okay, so only the most intelligent, right, and the strongest and the fastest would be allowed to reproduce, and people who they would consider to be not as strong and not as fit would not be allowed to reproduce. In some cases, those people would be forcibly sterilized so that they cannot reproduce, or in some extreme cases, like Nazi Germany, even sent to death camps to be killed. So let's talk about the rise of Hitler's Nazis in Germany. All right, so how did Germany become fascist? Now that you've learned about what fascism is, let's talk about the circumstances that led to Germany becoming fascist. So in the interwar period, right after World War I, Germany had created what was called the Weimar Republic, right? So this was their attempt at democracy, right? So it was based on a constitution that was written in the city of Weimar. Here was the flag for it. Okay, and after World War I, Germany enacted a new constitution and became a republic with a modern, liberal, democratic political structure. All right, so they had universal suffrage. They elected people to the Reichstag, which was their version of a parliament. And this only lasted for 15 years because Germany became a totalitarian regime under the fascist Nazi party. And let's find out how it happened. So first, let's look at the circumstances in Germany that led to the rise of fascism. So in World War I, how did Germany do? Well, Germany had been defeated in World War I. And because Germany had been defeated, that led to certain things happening to Germany. I'm going to get you guys to pause this video. You can go to D2L. Okay, so in D2L, let me see. If you go to D2L and you scroll down to the lesson 2 fascism in Nazi Germany lesson, it tells you to pause the lesson 2 video at circumstances in Germany that led to the rise of fascism. Okay, so that is the screen that we are currently at. So you can pause the video that you're currently watching, and then you can watch this video. So you click on that link there, and it will take you to, here, I'll show you what it looks like so that you are familiar by the time you get there. All right, so you click on that one, and you end up at this video here. That didn't work. All right, so maybe it's good that I'm testing this out. Let's see here. Oh, it's because I didn't do the whole thing. There we go. So if you click on the video that is in D2L under lesson 2, it'll take you to this video here, 20th century world, make Germany pay part 1. So if you get to that, then that means you're at the right place. Okay, so go ahead and watch that video now. Okay, welcome back to the lesson 2 video. So you just watched Make Germany Pay in the 20th century history video. Let's see what happened after World War I to Germany. So the Allies forced the Germans to sign what was called the Treaty of Versailles, right, a peace agreement. And the conditions to this treaty were quite severe for Germany, right? They lost land. Okay, so they had given some of their land away to Poland, right? Over here, they had to give away some of their land to Poland. They had given Alsace-Lorraine over here, France, which was unfortunate for Germany because Alsace-Lorraine had some steel-making plants. It had some iron deposits, which allowed them to make money. France was now given the right to mine German coal in the Saar region. Uh, the Germans had to demilitarize the Rhineland, okay, meaning that they had to take their military out of the Rhineland, which was this area in Germany that was close to France. Austria was not allowed to unite with Germany. In fact, Germany was not allowed to unite with any of the German-speaking people who lived outside of Germany now as a result of the Treaty of Versailles. And Germany had to reduce its army, its navy. They were not allowed to have an air force. They were not allowed to have submarines. And they had to pay massive war reparations, the equivalent of 33 billion US dollars. They only finished paying these off just a few years ago. And on top of that, they had to sign the War Guilt Clause, which stated that the Germans were guilty for having started the war in the first place. Okay, so what kinds of circumstances did that lead to? Well, there was much political instability in Germany after World War I. Right, there were people who became interested in communism. There were riots in the street. There was anger with the government. Right, and actually, some of this violence and some of these riots were actually caused by Hitler's own SA, his own paramilitary group, which we'll talk about soon. There was a lot of economic instability. Okay, so Germany was hit super hard by the Great Depression in the interwar period. There were tons of people who were unemployed. The value of the German currency had gone way, way down, so there was hyperinflation. And so people, their entire life savings were pretty much gone as their money was no longer worth anything. And so here you see a woman who's putting her money in the furnace, and she's using her money to heat her house. She's burning her money to heat her house because her money is pretty much not worth anything anymore. Okay, so this was a time of chaos for German society. And as you learned in lesson 1, totalitarian regimes are responding to what they see as dangerous and destabilizing changes. Okay, so chaos is good for a for a group of people who want to form a totalitarian government, because people are willing to accept a totalitarian government in order to end the chaos and create stability. Okay, so now you're going to watch another video. So you're going to watch a video called 20th Century World History. And you can find this video. Here, I'll show you where to find it. I shared it with all of you guys on Google Drive. So if you go to your Google Drive, there should be a folder of videos shared with you from me, and it's called Videos for Social 30. So if you click on that, there are 3 different videos. So start with the one that says 20th Century History. All right, and if you click on that, then a video will appear and begin. And so you can, and then you can start it at, let's see, you start it at 39:50. Okay, so at 39:50, and then you continue to watch it for 10 minutes, right? From 39:50 until 49:50 is your plan for 20th century history, which was shared with you in Google Drive. Okay, so go ahead and watch that now. Very good. Okay, so now you're back. While you were watching the video, you saw a bunch of different things happen, right? You were watching Hitler's rise to power. So now this is your partial notes. And in your partial notes, you'll see that there are different actions that Hitler and the Nazis took. Here they are, a list of them over here on the left, and some of them need to be completed. We're going to go through those actions together now. And as we go through these actions, you need to decide which totalitarian method was Hitler using, right? Which trait of a dictatorship is this action an example of, right? And you would have seen all these different totalitarian methods, the ones to choose from, at the beginning of lesson 1. All right, this is your list here: cult of the leader, use of propaganda, fear and intimidation, removal of opposition, controlled participation, limited accountability, control of the media, indoctrination of youth. Those are the things that you are going to write down in this column here. Okay? And then in this column here, we're going to write down which principle of liberalism is Hitler and the Nazi Party rejecting in this particular action that they are taking. Okay, so these are all actions that allowed Hitler to rise to power. Okay, and let's find out what they were and which totalitarian methods he was using. So, Hitler and the Nazi Party. In the 1920s, Hitler was rising to the leadership of Germany's Nazi Party. He lectured in a lot of public places, such as this one, and he spoke about the weakness of the democratic government. And he promoted certain things, such as absolute nationalism. He wanted the unification of all German-speaking peoples. He was willing to use private paramilitary organizations to terrorize his opposition. So while he was speaking in these places, he had his own paramilitary group called the SA Brown Shirts, and they were out and they were intimidating people, including his opponents or anybody who happened to be heckling him in the crowd. His SA stormtroopers would go around and they'd beat those people up, take them out to the streets and terrorize them so that nobody would oppose Hitler. Okay, he also promoted centralizing all decision-making in one leader, right? Which of course would be him. He advocated that a stronger government was needed to control the politically motivated violence occurring during the Great Depression. So there was a lot of violence in the streets of Germany during the Great Depression. And he said, we need a strong, stable government to end all of this chaos and violence. Well, guess what? Much of this violence was actually caused by his own paramilitary group, the SA Brown Shirts. All right, so remember that, totalitarian leaders, right, dictators, they want chaos because that allows them to say, hey, I am the only person who can end the chaos. All right, so the Nazi Party was a political party, and they had a political party platform like any other political party. And it included things like this: we demand the unification of all Germans in the Greater Germany on the basis of the right of self-determination of peoples. So first of all, they were saying we want to break the rule from the Treaty of Versailles, and we want to unite with all German-speaking people in Czechoslovakia, in Poland, in Austria. Let's get all the German-speaking people together in one country. Number 2, we demand equality of rights for the German people in respect to the other nations, abrogation of the peace treaties of Versailles and Saint-Germain. Only a member of the race can be a citizen. So here he's talking about the Aryan race, which means a white European person of Northern Europe or Western Europe descent. Okay, so he's talking about the Aryan race. And only an Aryan race member can be a citizen of Germany. A member of the race can only be one who is of German blood, without consideration of creed. Consequently, no Jew can be a member of the race. The right to determine matters concerning administration and law belongs only to the citizen. Therefore, we demand that every public office of any sort whatsoever, whether in the Reich, the county, or municipality, be filled only by citizens. All right, so only Aryan members of the Aryan race should be allowed to be members of the government, according to the Nazi platform. And number 10, the first obligation of every citizen must be to work, both spiritually and physically. All right, so they talk about the importance of people working and contributing to the collective. So the Nazi Party did not wait to get elected. In fact, they attempted a revolution. They staged a revolution. It's called the Beer Hall Putsch. And the Nazis tried to take over the government through a revolution back in 1923. It did not work, did not go so well. Hitler was arrested, he was thrown in jail, okay? And while he was in jail, he wrote a book. His book was called Mein Kampf, okay? And in this book, he explained his vision for a fascist Germany, right? He had a few scapegoats that he pointed out in the book, right? So he blamed Jews, communists, and democratic leaders of Germany for the problems that Germany was facing. Okay, so in your partial notes, you'll see that there's a blank space here in the first action. You can write Hitler blamed the Jews, communists, and democratic leaders for the problems that Germany was facing. This was included in his book. The name of his book was Mein Kampf. And then think, okay, which totalitarian method is that? And which principle of liberalism is he breaking? So he claimed that the Jews were to blame for certain things. Um, First of all, he said the Jews had sabotaged the German troops back in World War I, and that they were the reason why the Germans lost World War I. He blamed the Jews for having signed the Treaty of Versailles. He blamed, there were all sorts of like um, unfounded, of course, conspiracy theories, no evidence, in which he said that Jewish people were controlling the world's governments and controlling the world's banks, and that they were using this power to exploit the working class members of society. And this is obviously not true, but it is something that people were willing to believe. Right? He also promoted his racial theory. He promoted this idea that Germans formed a superior Aryan race. Okay? And Hitler's right-hand man, Joseph Goebbels, he was spreading Nazi disinformation through the radio. Okay, so you can go to your partial notes and you write Joseph Goebbels spread Nazi disinformation through the radio, right? So Hitler comes out of jail, he rejoins the Nazi party, and he becomes the leader again. And he is making a push for government. He wants the Nazi party to form government in Germany. So the Nazis do fairly well. They become the largest single party in the Reichstag, which is their parliament in Germany, but with a minority of seats. So it's like he formed a minority government. Okay, so it was not enough to form a majority government. So other party leaders convinced President Hindenburg to allow Hitler to be chancellor of a coalition government, believing he could be easily manipulated. So the way Germany worked at the time was they had a president and they also had a chancellor. Now, the president was this war hero called Hindenburg, and the chancellor would be the leader of the Reichstag, the leader of the parliament. And at the time, there was no majority party that had gained a majority in the Reichstag, and so they would need a few parties to work together to form a coalition. And so people didn't think that Hitler was particularly clever or savvy, and so they believed that they could make Hitler the chancellor and that the smaller political parties would be able to manipulate him and gain control of the Reichstag that way. Okay, obviously that did not work very well. What happens? Oh, the Reichstag burns. All right, so the Reichstag is their parliament. So we have the Reichstag Fire. So imagine that, our parliament building in Ottawa burning all the way to the ground, right? And that happened in Germany. And so Reichstag building burnt down. This is in your first notes. And thanks communists for this problem. Okay, so Chancellor Hitler convinced people that communists were trying to take power by terrorism. The Reichstag fire gives Hitler the opportunity to blame the communists and to give himself more power. Okay, so he was able to have communists banned from the Reichstag. In fact, he was able to effectively ban all other political parties because of this fire. Right? Because of this fire, Hitler was able to pass what was called the Enabling Act. All right, so the Enabling Act is right here. Okay, so at this point, Hitler has already called another election, and then this time he was given a much bigger portion of the seats in the Reichstag, and he passes what's called the Enabling Act, and this allows him to do certain things. Right, Hitler can now pass laws without consulting the Reichstag. Right, effectively, Germany becomes a dictatorship. It restricts freedom of opinion, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly. It puts an end to all opposing parties, and the leaders of those parties are thrown into concentration camps. And it gives the state a lot more power because there's no more need for a warrant to conduct searches. Okay, so police and military personnel, they can conduct searches with no weren't necessary. So with the Enabling Act of 1933, Germany effectively becomes a dictatorship. Okay, so this man's name was Ernst Röhm, and you see him in your partial notes. Right, so Ernst Röhm, he was a founding member of the Nazi Party. He founded the Nazi Party, and he and Hitler had founded the SA together. Right, so those paramilitary guys who used to rough people up in the streets. Ernst Röhm was the head of them. And so the SA was the first paramilitary wing of the Nazi Party, and their role was to protect Nazi rallies and assemblies and disrupt the rallies of other political parties. And most members of the SA were unemployed, working class men. Their members and leaders had embraced socialism. Hitler did not like socialism. He did not like communism, right? And some of these guys were now starting to take on some socialist or communist beliefs. And Rome and many other leaders of the SA believed that a second revolution was needed, this time to turn Germany into a communist state. So Hitler felt very threatened by Rome and other SA leaders. How is he going to handle this? Well, he handled it through bloodshed. Ernst Röhm, the leader of Hitler's SA, was seen as a threat to Hitler's power. Rome and other SA members were murdered by Hitler's SS. This was called the Night of the Long Knives. You can put that in your partial notes. All right, so at this point, Hitler has shown the leadership of his paramilitary groups that they must obey him and they must be loyal to him or suffer severe consequences. All right, and so on the Night of the Long Knives, Hitler, he turned on the SA, the brown shirts that helped him gain power, and he replaced them with the SS. And he used the SS to kill his old friends in the SA. Right? And political prisoners, including people who opposed Hitler, were all thrown in concentration camps by the SS. Right? So he was asked about this, why he didn't give these people a fair trial. The members of the SA, why were they killed on the Night of the Long Knives? And Hitler spoke in the Reichstag. He said, "I alone, during those 24 hours, was the supreme court of justice of the German people." That sounds like a totalitarian method, right? That seems like rejection of the principle of separation of powers, right? Or the rule of law, right? And so the rule of law is clearly being violated in this. So remember President Hindenburg? He died in 1934. And so there used to be two roles. There used to be a president and a chancellor. Well, Hitler takes this opportunity to merge the roles of chancellor and president and make himself Führer of the country. Hitler declares himself Führer. And you can put that in your partial notes. And now, because of this, the military, every soldier in the military, they must swear a personal oath of loyalty, not to the German nation, right, but to Hitler himself. And they must swear to protect him no matter what. So here are all the steps that allowed Hitler to rise to power. Okay, so we have Hitler became chancellor through a minority government. Then there was the Reichstag Fire, which gave Hitler the opportunity to pass the Enabling Act. And then he is now above the law and capable of passing laws however he wants, which gives him the opportunity to have the Night of the Long Knives, where he gets rid of his political opponents. President Hindenburg dies, and Hitler declares himself the Führer, as members of the military must declare an oath of loyalty directly to Hitler himself. Okay, so now you can pause this video again, and you can go back to the video you were watching last time, which was, again, shared with you. It's the 20th century world history video, and this time you can go all the way up to 4950, which is where you finished off last time. You can watch until you get to 5845, all right, which I think is the end of the video. Okay, or maybe it's not, but you just watch 5845 and then you come back to this lesson 2 video. So go ahead and pause this video that you are currently watching and go learn about the rule of Hitler's Nazis. And go. Welcome back. Okay, so you just learned about what it was like to live under Hitler's Nazis. Let's go through some of those ideas together now. So the video talked to you about education, right? It talked about how children were taught Nazi ideals, including racial purity, and what they considered to be the right version of German history in schools. Of course, they rewrote some of that history to make Germany look better. And children were taught social Darwinism. They learned that Aryans were members of the master race and that other groups of people were below them. They learned about Jewish people in school. So teachers would teach their children about Jews and teach the children to be afraid of Jews and to not accept them. This was a children's book from the time period, right? So on the left side of the book, you can see this man is meant to be an Aryan man, right? A German man. And the man on the right, this is meant to be a Jewish man, right? And so this is to indoctrinate and create fear among the children. Children were also encouraged to join youth groups, right? This is an example of controlled participation, right? So children, they joined these youth groups. They were taught loyalty to the Nazi regime, right? So here are the names of the different youth groups for the different ages. And the focus of this was on future military roles, right? Girls were also encouraged to join the youth groups as well with different names. And the focus was more on them, eventually becoming mothers of the master race, right? Eventually, staying home, because this was a reactionary ideology. They did not want women's rights. They wanted women to go back to the way they used to be when their role was to stay at home, take care of the kids, and not involve themselves in society. The Hitler Youth were, they were encouraged or even forced to swear an oath of loyalty to Hitler himself, right? So this was Hitler's way of controlling the next generation of Germans. Okay. Now, once Hitler was in power, he created a ministry for popular enlightenment and propaganda. So, like in Canada, we have the Ministry of the Environment, we have the Ministry of Natural Resources, we have the Ministry of Health, Ministry of, the economy, right? All of these different things. Well, in Germany at the time, they had a ministry for propaganda, and the head of it was Joseph Goebbels. And all newspapers were controlled by the Nazi Party. And through the media, Hitler was presented as being this kind man, like a nice guy, simple pleasures, right? Meanwhile, Jews were being persecuted violently in society, right? So Jews were blamed for being part of the government that accepted the Treaty of Versailles, for controlling industry and banking systems. A lot of lies were spread by the Nazis in order to accomplish this. Jews were blamed for, if you look at this picture here, this person here is meant to look like a Jewish person who is stabbing the German military in the back, right? And Nazis passed laws throughout the years that progressively restricted the rights of Jewish people. Okay, so you're going to learn about some of these laws that were passed in Nazi Germany against Jewish people. So in 1933, Jews are barred from working for the government, from becoming lawyers, and working as editors in newspapers. The number of Jewish students in public schools was also strictly limited. By 1935, Jewish officers are expelled from the army, and then the Nuremberg laws are passed in 1935. Let's look at those. The Nuremberg laws included this one: marriage between Jews and citizens of German or kindred blood are forbidden. Okay, so no interracial marriage there. And then outside of that, sex between a Jewish person and a person of Aryan blood was not allowed either. Jews could not vote or hold public office. In 1936, Jews are banned from working as tax consultants, veterinarians, or teachers in public schools. By 1938, Jews are not allowed to change their names because some Jewish people were changing their names to avoid persecution. Well, they made it so that Jews couldn't do that anymore. They also could not change the names of their businesses, right? And on top of that, Jews must now report all of their property on top of $30,000, right? Because much of that Jewish property is being confiscated, taken away from the Jewish people, and given to non-Jewish people. On top of that, they had to identify themselves, with the Star of David so that everybody would know who a Jewish person was in society. Eventually, Jewish people were rounded up and placed in specific areas of the city called ghettos that were usually walled off so that the Jewish people could not escape. And then eventually, Jewish people were taken out to slave labor camps, which later on became extermination camps, and the goal being to kill as many Jewish people as possible, as quickly as possible. And so overall, 6 million Jews died during Nazi rule, and this is known as the Holocaust. The Nazi Party enforced universal military service, so all men had to join the military at a certain point in their life. Okay, so now we're going to watch another video. So you're going to see that I shared a couple other videos with you. So if you go back to the folder that I sent you in your Google Docs or in your Google Drive, you'll see that there's Life in Hitler's Germany, Part 1, and Life in Hitler's Germany, Part 2. So you click on Part 1 and start watching it. It looks like this. Okay, so you can watch that and then also watch Part 2 once you're done Part 1. Okay, so together they're about 25 minutes. Okay, and then as you are watching the video, you can be completing the chart that is in your partial notes. Okay, so you'll see that in your partial notes. It says from Life in Hitler's Germany video, right? So there are more notes here, and you can just write down which totalitarian method is being used and which principle of liberalism is being rejected with each of these actions. So go ahead and watch that now. Welcome back to your lesson 2 video. Let's finish it off. So, as you learned in the other video you were just watching, Germans were required to participate in the Reich labor service, right? They had to work hard between the ages of 18 and 25. They spent 6 months before they joined their military service, and they created these massive public projects such as the Autobahn, which are the highways that connect the different cities of Germany. There was one quote from the video saying, you know, a German woman said, "He is my mother and my father. He keeps me safe from all harm," right? And then a German farmer also said, "We all felt the same happiness and joy. Things were looking up. I believe no statesman has ever been loved as Adolf Hitler was then." Okay, so these are examples of, you know, Hitler creating a cult of the leader, right? And people, you know, really buying into it. They had festivals for the Fuhrer, as you saw in the video, which really enhanced the cult of the leader. And there were also Nazi book burnings, as you saw in the video, right? And so they would round up books that people owned that were not allowed by the Nazis, right? So books that they believed conflicted with Nazi ideology. And they would take those books and they'd pile them up and then they'd burn them. And it was a public display of loyalty to the Nazi party, and showing that they will not, you know, even fill their heads with any information that goes against what the Nazis believe. In the video, the woman spoke about speaking through a flower, right? You must only say positive things about Hitler and the Nazi party. And so that's, you know, that shows the control over information that the Nazi party had. And anybody who was opposed to the Nazi party would have been sent to a concentration camp, right? And so here's a photo of some, you know, a group of people in a concentration camp. These concentration camps contain many horrors, terrible things. They were ran by the SS, and they led to a lot of deaths, right? Hitler also had a secret police that was called the Gestapo, and the Gestapo, they were everywhere, right? They were really paying attention. They were similar in some ways to the NKVD, which you learned about in lesson 1 in the USSR, and they would find people who were secretly opposed to Hitler, and they would throw those people into concentration camps. And professionals, they had to toe the party line as well, right? So if you were a professor or if you were a doctor or a lawyer, you had to, you know, you had to become a Nazi. You had to join the political party. Otherwise, you could definitely lose your job. So let's talk a little bit about the economic system of fascism. So people were allowed to own private property, and capitalism was the economic system being used. So there was some element of economic freedom there. But big business was collaborative with the government. Okay, so the big business owners, they were party members, right? So they were part of the Nazi party, and they were given special privileges in society. Meanwhile, labor unions, strikes, those were banned, right? So the government was clearly on the side of the business owners. And this was considered capitalism for the common good, right? So it was capitalism not 100% for self-interest, but also for collective interest in some ways. And friends of the Nazi Party were given better access to raw materials, right? So they'd be given better mining rights and things like that. Okay, let's talk about farming and industry. So farming and industries were given government subsidies. So this is a form of government intervention in the economy, right? The government would give money to the farmers and the different factory owners. And the purchase of farmers' produce was guaranteed. So people who were farmers, they knew that their produce was going to be purchased. And the government restricted foreign imports to encourage consumption of German-made goods. So this is another way in which government involved itself in the economy. So it was not a totally capitalist economy. Okay, and the government's task was to rebuild the military, and much of that was done through the use of confiscated Jewish property, right? So Jewish people had their property taken away from them, and a lot of that property was used to rebuild the military. Okay, so you can feel free to pause the video. You can take a look at this. Now, for many German people, they actually enjoyed Nazi rule because the lives of many Germans greatly improved, right? If you were an Aryan German who joined the Nazi party and you bought into the whole idea of fascism, your life could have gotten a lot better because there was a drop in unemployment at the time. There was an increase in prosperity. There was very strict enforcement of the law, which led to, I mean, an sort of an illusion of security, because in reality, society was very dangerous. If anybody spoke out against Hitler, they could be killed. And there were these frequent ceremonies and rallies, and that brought confidence to the German people. As you saw in that last video, people, they enjoyed these rallies. They enjoyed these gatherings because it gave them national pride. However, there was terrible mistreatment of anybody who was not part of the master race. Right, so Nazi eugenics were quite severe. So they had a term for people who were considered to not be part of the master race. These were considered subhumans in the eyes of the Nazis. All right, so the subhumans, these were groups of people who were deemed racially or socially inferior. That included Jewish people, the Roma people, who they called gypsies. That would include Black people, Jehovah's Witnesses, gay people, mentally or physically disabled people. All of those people were considered to be subhuman, less than human. Okay? And to ensure that only desirable genetic traits were passed on to future generations, millions of these people, who they considered subhuman, were sent to extermination camps. So altogether, 9 to 11 million people, and 6 of those million people were Jews, that number was killed. Right, so a terrible number of people were killed because they wanted to create this master race of Aryans. Meanwhile, Aryan Germans, they were encouraged to have a lot of children, right, because they wanted to promote the Aryan race. Right, so when a newlywed couple was born, if they were an Aryan couple, then they would be given 1,000 marks, which was the equivalent of $6,000 today. And this was a loan, which means that you'd have to give that money back to the government eventually. However, for every child you had, you got to keep 250 marks. So the more children you had, the more of that money you got to keep for yourself. And if you were a woman and you had more than 8 children, then the Nazi Party would send you a gold medal, right? Which would make it all worthwhile, right? Of course, right? And professional working women such as doctors, teachers, and civil servants, they lost their jobs. They were sent home and told, you are now a mother, you are a wife, and your role is to do those things. Okay, so that is a pretty long video, including other videos. This lesson was a fairly long one, but I hope you learned a lot about Nazi Germany. If you have any questions, make sure you send me an email. Have a good day, everybody.